What's up, everybody? Spencer Israel here. Let's do some charts, some technicals with Jake Wujastyk from TrendSpider. Jake, how are we doing today? What's up, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. You're saying my last name better and better every time we talk.
Every time. Get it better every time. That's what I'm talking about. No, we've gotten to the point now, Jake, where I've now been asked on more than one occasion from other people at Benzinga, like, yo, Spencer, how do you pronounce this dude's name? Because they know that I know.
Hey, he's a pro. He's a pro. Yeah, I mean, it was quite a day in the market, that's for sure.
Oh my God. What about those reversals?
Beauty. I love it.
Let's talk about that. Let's bring up your charts and talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, you looked at pre-market this morning and it was honestly mind-blowing the amount some of these stocks were down. And not even individual growth names, which were down huge, but even the market in general, generally gapping down like that, there's no way you usually do not have some type of reversal, at least to start the day, and maybe you continue and close below the open. But I mean, today we had a just absolutely ripper after the first, couple minutes of open. The dust was settling, but the SPY, the Qs, they had a good day. But really the impressive names were the growth names, and we'll go over that. And obviously growth names are still down huge, but compared to where they started this morning, for example, FUBO in the mid 14s this morning, now it's at $21, literally almost a 50% move up from where it was this morning after the earnings after hours. So just some huge volatility today. And I'm going to just start with the broad markets as always. And there's a common theme across the broad markets today. For those that are familiar with TrendSpider, remember we do have the raindrop chart, something that I go over quite often. And the raindrop charts are something that allow us to see kind of what's going on within the candle's volume. So the common theme across the board today is the fact that we did have these green raindrops. So notice today, if you're not familiar with what a hollow candle is any time that your close is higher than your open. It doesn't matter if it's a red or if it's a green hollow candle. In my case, it's a white hollow candle because my background is white. But you can change these if you did want to have these green. I prefer them just this kind of gray outline. But anytime you have a hollow candle, it's worth noting that buyers are definitely in control versus the close versus the open. So anytime you have a hollow candle like this, when it's red, that is generally a pretty good sign, because it means even though we're down for the day, we're still up compared to where we opened at. And so that means that there was some conviction by buyers into the rest of the day, into the close. Now, on top of that, we also have the raindrop charts, which are the volume weighted charts here. Now, let me zoom in a little bit, and you'll see that for a raindrop chart, you have your left bar, you have your right bar. Generally, if you're looking at a bar chart, your left bars are open, your right bars are closed. In this case, this is the volume weighted average price for the first half of the time frame. In this case, we're looking at the daily chart on SPY, and then this right bar is your second half of the day's VWAP. So in this case, you can see definitely buyers are in control, volume higher than what it was during the first half of the day, which kind of is right in line with that hollow candle that we're seeing. But on top of that, and the main thing that I want to point out, which is kind of common across the board today, is all of this volume at the top of the range. Anytime you see volume like this, where you don't have a lot of volume profile at the bottom, and just to step back for a second, we went over the price bar. The second part of this candle is the volume profile overlaid on top of the candle. Sorry, I got a little excited there because it's just a crazy day. But the volume profile is on the left for the first half of the day, same as the VWAP, and the volume profile on the right. So the way you can kind of decipher this is notice that most of the volume profile during the second half of the day is at the top of the range. Notice here that it's flat. So there is no volume profile here. So we do have a ton of videos on YouTube from TrendSpider if you do want to look more into raindrops. But just the gist of this is anytime you have volume at the top of the range like we did today, that means that buyers are willing to absorb any supply that's being dumped on the market at that higher point. So if we go to something like the Qs, this is what I like to kind of show here. Notice here, we had the opposite effect last week. So notice here, instead of that volume at the top of the range, we had that volume at the bottom of the range, which definitely made me a little iffy going into the next few days, because we know that there were no buyers there to absorb that supply near the top of the range. All of that supply was essentially having to be absorbed at the low of the day, which tells us that sellers are definitely in control. So anytime that you see volume at the top of the range, that tells us that buyers are in control. Anytime you see volume at the bottom of the range, that means buyers are not in control because they're having to absorb that supply near the bottom of that day's range. So anytime you see that, definitely keep an eye out for that. But if you look here on the Qs, let me get rid of some of these gaps here, clean up the chart a little bit. Same thing. Obviously, we closed below yesterday's close, so that makes it a red candle. But you can see that we have a green raindrop, which shows that buyers were definitely there, willing to absorb that supply into the end of the day, and also at the top of the range. So if you go across all the broad market charts here, they're all the same. IWM, same thing, red day, but you had a lot of that volume. And the main thing that I want to point out here is the fact that this goes both ways, right? So if you look at the Qs, this was a little bit of a red flag on Friday, right? So we had, let me split the screen here and I'll show you what we had on Friday. Essentially what we had here, ooh, maybe that does mess it up. There we go. Let me split the screen here. I'll zoom back in so you guys can see a little better. So what we had on Friday was a gap up, right? It was a pretty strong day for Friday. Well, at least to start the day. We gapped up and we closed green for the day. But notice what we had. We had a red raindrop, even though the daily candle close was higher than the previous day. So anytime you see this discrepancy where you've got this, and keep in mind, I don't really like solid candles either. That means that even though we closed above Thursday's close, it's solid because we closed below the open. So anytime you have a red raindrop and a solid candle that is green, that is a big red flag. You can almost look at that as a new type of divergence. So anytime you are using raindrop charts, you definitely want to split the screen and look at the candle as well. So pretty much the opposite today, where we have this red candle, but we have the green raindrop. So really across the board, it was looking good, other than the Dow Jones Industrial ETF. That was the only one that closed red today and was in line with the day's price action. So what you can see here is you can see that we pretty much gapped down. If it was really a strong day for DIA, we'd really want to see that volume more closer to the top of the range. But instead, what you see here is pretty much what we saw on the Qs on Friday, where you've got this wick, but a lot of that volume is at the bottom of the range. So that is not what you want to see. You want to see something like we saw on SPY, where we have this wick and there's really no volume. So notice here, we've got the wick today and there's really no volume. So we know that this was likely a drop on very low volume, and most of that action was taking place at the top of the range. So all in all, very strong day in the market. Anything can happen in the market, but I would be shocked if we didn't have a very strong day into tomorrow. Obviously, if I turn on the gap snake here, you'll see that we do have, let me turn on indicators. So we're still working with the zoom here. I usually don't have it this zoomed. Okay, there we go. So you'll see here that, we do have a gap below, which is something to consider on the bearish side of things, but we also have this gap above. So that is something to also consider. And this is something with the Qs as well. I mean, I think last week we were talking about the Qs kind of looking like Swiss cheese below. And what I mean by that is I mean that we had all these gaps below. So here's a gap right here that we didn't fill today. Here's another gap here highlighted in yellow. We did fill that today. Another gap here, we filled that yesterday. So we are starting to fill these gaps below, which is very healthy for the Qs. You don't necessarily want to just continue going up with all of these gaps below. It's kind of like if you're standing on a deck and you've got all these termites eating holes in the deck, and enough people get on top of that deck, the structure is going to collapse because there's all these holes in the wood. Same thing here. If there's enough holes in the price action, the price is going to fill that, and then we're going to kind of continue up. Now, if we look more at the candle side of things, and we look at, let's say, the weekly chart, you'll see here that this is now going to be the fourth red candle in a row for the weekly chart. So if we go back and we look at the previous times this has happened, we do not ever have more than 4 red weeks in a row. I was going to say 5, but we rarely, if ever, have 5 red weeks in a row. So the time that we did have 4 red weeks in a row was back in 2018. So could we be starting a 2018 type of move? Maybe. This was back in October of 2018. We had 4 red weeks in a row. We actually undercut that 4th red week's low and then closed green, but then we continued to move down after that. So that is very much a possibility. But at least for the short term, I would assume that we have some type of at least short-term rally here. As I mentioned, we are still pretty early in the week, so we don't want to look too deep at the candles, but we can look and see that 4 red weeks in a row generally ends with at least the next couple weeks being stable or up. So from a short-term perspective, I'm thinking some bullishness here. From a longer-term perspective, we could be entering more of a move down like we saw in October to December of 2018, but we'll just have to see that play out. Now, the reason why I am thinking that this possibly could be something going into June, if we look at the VIX, something really interesting on the VIX. I found this pattern a couple days ago, maybe a week ago. I think I found it after our last one, so I haven't touched on this chart yet. If you look at VIX, 2020 of during the COVID drop, we did have obviously this huge spike. We barely missed the highs that we saw in 2008, but what is the same is the fact that we've literally melted down since then, and we're right back at this 15 to 16 area. Now, if you look at this green circle in this highlighted orange area, notice that we are literally at that same exact spot now. So that doesn't mean that this is going to play out exactly like the VIX did back in 2010, where we had this huge spike in May of 2010. But one thing that I wanted to point out here, looking at the seasonality, that means that we're looking at how each month of the year has performed since a specific time. In this case, we're going to anchor back 5 years ago from the 2016, pretty much the low there. Notice what happens here. And let me exclude 2021 data. So May only has a 20% win rate for VIX over the last 5 years. Notice here what's happening. You have 2 months of pretty down day or down months, right? 20% win rate means that 20% of the time May closed green versus April. So that means that 80% of the time we closed red versus April's close. So one thing that I wanted to point out here, let me pull up the YouTube stream in case there's any questions. Let's see, nothing too crazy yet. Just want to keep that up. So notice here what we have. Not only do we have the same exact setup here, almost the same exact time of the year. Notice this was in April of 2010. This is in April and May of 2021. And what you'll notice here is not only on the technical side, but June has an 80% win rate. That is a huge spike from April and May. So not only do we have this interesting technical setup here, but we also have this 80% win rate for the VIX. Now, the Qs are not really tied to the VIX. It's more tied to the S&P 500. But same thing. I mean, the broad markets pretty much move in tandem. You're really not going to see the S&P 500 up huge 1 month and the Qs down huge. Generally, they're going to move somewhat in tandem. So going to the SPY, you'll see here that what's interesting is we actually have a pretty strong win rate even for June. So there is a little bit of a weird discrepancy here with the SPY and the VIX both having very strong win rates in June. So if we look at the longer term side of things, I mean, we've already broken out through this long-term level of resistance. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. So we've broken out this long-term level of resistance, and you'll see here that, it would be healthy at this point to simply pull back and retest this previous resistance and act as support. So it's hard for me to say this whole thing is over, but at least short term, it does look like we're at least going to get a little bit of a bounce into the middle of the week. However, as I mentioned, a pullback down to around 400, which is that previous resistance area, would be a strong level of support to hold. And on top of that, I mean, June has an 80% win rate. So we'll just have to see if we do get maybe a pullback and then a green close into May. But all in all, it is important to note that all of these summer months do have pretty strong seasonality. So that's something I definitely wanted to point out. And then really go into what I consider now the other part of the broad markets, which is crypto. You can see here on crypto, we are really starting to try to get through this area that we've been stuck at now for about 3 months. And what you can see here is this is essentially the measured move from 2017 down to the 2018 lows. And what you can see is that we are stuck at this 3.618 extension. And so a lot of people ask, well, why are you using fibs? What's the point of using fibs? I used to actually hate fibs, believe it or not. But fibs are something that becomes self-fulfilling. And especially when you don't have any prior price action to go off of, meaning that Bitcoin is at all-time highs. There's no other price action to compare this to. This is when you like to really look at the fibs because you're starting to see a little more of that price discovery. And that's when you want to actually look at the fibs. So in this case, if we break through, let's say the previous highs, we can use the previous highs from last month's high. However, over the longer term, we did get stuck right at that 3.618. So the 3.618 literally is right at that previous high. So if we do break through that, that's when things get interesting. Now, the one thing that I'll point out here on the seasonality side of things, we do actually have declining seasonality going into summer where, the broad markets, SPY, the Qs have a pretty strong win rate into the summer. So just keep that in mind. What I like to do is I like to anchor from the December 2017 highs, and you'll see here that these are the win rates. Now, keep in mind that if we anchor from the 2017 highs, and when I say anchor, I just mean that's where we're starting from. You can see here that this is taking into account some of that bear market that we did see in crypto. So we are pretty much in a bull market full on still. So just keep in mind that this is a little bit of that bull market and bear market seasonality. Generally, I like to look at seasonality from like we just looked at on VIX. Since January 2016, that was pretty much the bottom the market put in before we just absolutely ripped. Whereas here, we don't have as much data to go back. We can go back since 2014, and you'll see still, though, into July and August, those 2 months only have a 33% win rate. So we'll have to see if this does continue up or it starts to roll over. If we look at this shorter term time frame here, I think we touched on this chart last week, but the main thing I want to point out here is looking at the anchored volume by price from the January swing low here. And you'll see that we're just stuck in this break-even supply area. So as we just talked about with maybe we didn't talk about, I think I just did a video on it, but either way, this area, imagine you buy Bitcoin at 57K. Then you deal with a drawdown of 47K. Well, once you get back to break even, maybe you're going to start to take some off the table. Enough people do that. It adds to supply. We're calling it break even supply because you get back to break even and you start to dump some of your position. That adds to the supply. That's why we're calling it break even supply. Someone's saying the screen is blurry. I can try to zoom out a little bit. Is this better? Brandon, is this better? We wanted to be able to see the axis a little better on the price side of things, but I'm pretty sure this is going to make it a little less blurry. But either way, for Bitcoin, we're pretty much stuck right in this supply zone. If we get through this supply zone, we will possibly start to retest those highs around 60, almost right on the dot at 65K. So that is Bitcoin. Ethereum is definitely kind of leading the way as it has been for a while now. So if we look at Ethereum here, we're about to hit all-time highs again. And at this point, this is where we don't have any price action to go off of. There's nowhere else that we can draw a horizontal level and say, okay, we were here before. This is where you have to really put in the fibs. So this is where you go to the weekly chart. you measure the move from the 2017 highs to the lows, and you'll see here that that 3.618 extension is right around 4,900. I'm just going to call it 5,000 just because that's the psychological area to skip trial. Let me get out of this. I'm trying to see the chat here. No, Brandon, I think it was my Zoom. But either way, yeah, so Ethereum, I mean, Ethereum it looks like a magnet up to around 5K. Now, Litecoin, this is one that's kind of lagging Ethereum and Bitcoin. We've got this absolutely massive rounded bottom here, and we're pretty much trading right at the 2017 all-time highs. So, you know, it would make a little sense to pull back here, but at the same time, we're starting to look pretty bullish again on the daily time frame. And this is a great example of using the anchored volume by price. So what you want to do here is you want to start your volume by price from the swing low. So, and you can just move this around. Notice here, I'm going to go find the anchor point. I just move this and notice that the volume is changing as I move it. In this case, I want to start it from this capitulation point here. And notice what's happening. We have this huge volume shelf here. So what that means is there's a ton of, I don't want to say shares because this is crypto, but there's a ton of volume holding in this general area. So pretty much since the bottom here, there's a lot of shares pretty much holding at break even or barely above break even now. And so this allows the price to move up off of these levels. And it is interesting to see that we did bounce exactly where we needed to. Now you can always anchor a VWAP as well from this area. You'll see that the VWAP's much further below. So in this case, the volume by price is working a lot better. And so if we did continue up, obviously the previous high is going to be our first target. But if you wanted to look at maybe the 1.618 extension or 2.618 extension, that would be where you throw up this 2.8 extension. Notice how perfectly we tested the 1.618 extension on this measured move here. So trust me, fibs used to be something I used to kind of call voodoo, if you will. They are not, especially 0.618 extensions on crypto act literally as perfect resistance a lot of the time. Dogecoin is another example of this over the weekend. If you look at Dogecoin here, let me go to Kraken. Let's see, where did we anchor this from? So on Doge, you anchor from this here to this. Notice where we had trouble getting through, almost perfectly at this supply zone above. Excuse me, not this supply zone, this 0.618 extension above. So, you know, if you are trading crypto, definitely keep the 0.618 extensions on your chart because they are very relevant. Now, obviously, not every time is going to be as perfect as Litecoin just was as we went over. But generally, if you have some type of zone around that 0.618 extension, you'll see that it acts as a very strong level of resistance or an area for possibly sellers to come in. So definitely recommend trying out the extensions. And the nice thing about it is you can create an alert on any of these areas. So, you know, if you're watching for possibly another test above at this 0.67 area above, right click, create an alert at this line, and you can create these zones around the 0.618 extension. You don't have to just draw the zone. You can actually create what's called a sensitivity alert around this area on the platform. So that essentially means anytime the price gets anywhere within this purple area and you click touch, whenever that, let's say this 30-minute candle touches in this purple zone, you'll get an alert right when that 30-minute candle closes. So this is something that's really powerful on TrendSpider. It's part of the alert system. And remember, we do have that coupon code, as always, on the live stream, BZ25 for 25% off. Just go to TrendSpider.com, go to the pricing page, and you can try this out for free. We have a 7-day free trial. We can always extend it longer if you need to. So that's Doge. That's probably pretty good for the crypto for now, unless there's some other crypto. I'm having trouble seeing. Let's see. YouTube skip trial. think YouTube's at the point where they're not even going to let me. Well, I can see most of the comments here. I just have to scroll up. So if there's no other crypto to look at, let's look at some interesting case studies over the last day. So obviously all of these growth names have gotten absolutely destroyed. And, you may wonder, well, why did we bounce here? What was the reason? What was the function of this bounce? Was it an overextension to some area? Well, one thing that's really interesting is if you turn on the weekly Bollinger Band on the daily candle, you'll notice something really interesting on quite a few of these names over the last couple days. Snowflake is a good example of this to start off with. Notice where Snowflake bounced at, right at this weekly Bollinger Band. So what you can do on TrendSpider is you can take the daily candle and then you can overlay the weekly Bollinger Band on top of it, so you can see what's going on the longer term side of things while still getting an idea of what the shorter term chart looks like the daily chart versus the weekly Bollinger Band. So, I mean, almost a perfect touch of this weekly Bollinger Band here. That's exactly where we bounced off of. So we'll have to see if we do maybe move all the way up to this middle band above. That's generally what happens. I mean, a lot of the time. Now, keep in mind, Snowflake doesn't have a lot of data to go off of. That's why this Bollinger Band doesn't go all the way back to the IPO, because you have to have some data in there to create the Bollinger Band with the SMA 20 here. But generally, you will get a pretty strong bounce off this area. You can tell here we did have a slight bounce on the way down. But with this being kind of what I would call capitulation, who knows, maybe it's not, but I'm thinking it probably is. The middle band above, which is just your weekly SMA 20, is around 253. So that doesn't have to happen tomorrow, doesn't have to happen next week or this month. But if you did want to be alerted next time the price gets anywhere around this middle band, this 20-week SMA, this is where you can go in and create the same type of alert that I just did on the fib levels. And we'll just have to see if this is an area where we can get to above. That would be quite a move. That would be about 25% or so. But yeah, I mean, that's what we're seeing here is just that perfect bounce off the weekly Bollinger Band on the lower band. PLTR, I know a lot of people are watching PLTR today. I'm sure a lot of people were also watching it today when it was at 16 something pre-market. And everyone's like, oh man, this is it. Nope. Gap down right to the lower weekly Bollinger Band and then had a very strong reversal today. Now, if we turn on the volume, you'll see here that definitely trend changing volume here. I mean, look at that volume. It's much bigger than really any of these candles, than any of these other previous bars. Now, keep in mind, we did have a pretty big green bar back in February, and we did continue down. But we're in a much different area. We're pretty much right at this lower Bollinger Band, showing that we're pretty overextended to the downside. And on top of that, we had 10 red days in a row. We started up here at 24.23 on April 27th and moved down all the way to 18.24 yesterday, or around 18.15 or so. Gap down, and then we reversed. So, I mean, it's kind of like a coiled spring at this point. Now, one thing to keep in mind, if you guys are familiar with the anchored VWAP, the anchored VWAP is just saying, what is the volume weighted average price since we started this reversal here on April 27th? And you'll see that we literally moved up almost perfectly to this area above. So keep that in mind if you are looking at possibly this moving higher tomorrow. We are going to have to get through this VWAP right here, which is pretty much where a majority of the shares, the average price per share traded is at break even. So remember, as people get back to break even, supply increases because those people want to get out of their trade and just move on and just take their money at break even. Now, if we anchor a volume by price from the swing high here as well, you'll notice that we also kind of gapped into this volume as well. So we have the VWAP and quite a bit of volume above. So we'll just have to see what happens. Now, looking at the seasonality, not only did we move right up to this anchored VWAP, but if we look at the seasonality for the day of the week, so go to the day of the week since the start of 2021, Oh, you'll see here that Wednesday has a 28% win rate. So technically speaking, we are entering the weakest day of the week since the start of this year. So 28% win rate, as I mentioned before, means that 28% of the time we close red versus green, or excuse me, we close green versus the previous day's close. So we'll just have to see if this actually plays out. But we are at resistance. We are at this weaker seasonality. So just keep that in mind. Now, another one, I'm sure a lot of people are watching. I haven't seen what FUBO is doing right now after hours. What are we at? Whoa, 22. Let's go. Beautiful. All right. Well, this is about the perfect time to go over this chart because we are pretty much right at the resistance above. So if we anchor the volume by price from the swing high here, you'll see that we're literally right at this supply zone. Now you can't see it because let's see if I turn on aftermarket. Yeah. Okay. So you can see here, this is including aftermarket data. We literally are moving up right into this supply zone above. So if you are looking at an area where price could have some trouble going into the rest of the week, this is exactly where it is. It's where the supply is above. As I mentioned, we're calling this supply. Imagine you bought FUBO at 21.50. You just dealt with FUBO going all the way down to around 14.50 this morning. You finally get back to break even, and you're like, well, that was a hell of a ride. Maybe I'm going to get out and take my money elsewhere. That's why this is going to act as supply initially. But if we get something like this on FUBO, that's ideally what we'd like to see, kind of this area acting as initial resistance. And then once we do digest a lot of that supply, that's where we can get this bounce off of this shelf. So definitely something to keep in mind for FUBO, but what a move after hours. Now, FUBO, same thing. Wednesday is not the weakest day of the week, but it's not the strongest. 44% win rate. Not really nothing like as an outlier, where PLTR definitely had an outlier for February with that 23 or 28% win rate. So this doesn't really do a ton for me. Now, one thing to also remember, you can't really do much more seasonal analysis on this because it hasn't been around that long. You can't go and look at the month of the year seasonality because there's not enough months that this has gone on. For FUBO, PLTR, same thing. I mean, if you look at PLTR over the last 10 months or so, you can't really see a ton of data here. So definitely something to keep in mind going into the summer months. We can't really say, oh yeah, the summer months are really strong for PLTR or FUBO because we don't have that seasonality like we do on SPY, VIX, and those types of things. So next one that I wanted to touch on was Tesla. I know Tesla is definitely it was a little weak today. We did have a decent bounce here. But one thing that I'll note here is the seasonality for Tesla is quite fascinating. So if you go to the week of the year and you go back since 2016, the 2016 lows, look what you have here. This week, which is the 20th week of the year, has not closed green ever in the last 5 years. So looking back 5 years, the 20th week of the year, which is this week, never closes green. So it's not shocking to see that you do have this pretty weak price action with this pretty rough seasonality going into the 21st week of the year. Now, notice what happens is you have a 0% win rate, and then the 21st week of the year, and then the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th all have 80% win rates. So who knows? Is this the week to go buy Tesla and play the seasonality into the next 4 weeks? That's definitely a possibility as well. But it is interesting to note that there is not another week over the last 5 years that has closed with a 0% win rate. The lowest that we have is the 18th week of the year, which has a 17% win rate. but you do not have any other 0% win rate going into the 20th week. So definitely something to keep in mind. A lot of people look at seasonality and they're like, yeah, okay, whatever. No, it is very powerful. It plays out a lot more than you would think. And there's a lot of different ways that you can use seasonality on TrendSpider. A lot of platforms do have sometimes monthly seasonality, but to be able to go to the week of the year or the day of the week, or even if you're a day trading scalper, you can go and look at the hour of the day and you can say, all right, since the start of 2021, is there a particular hour of the day that has a strong win rate? Or you could even go to the start of May. You can say, since May started, is there a particular hour of the day that trades better than another one? In this case, you can see the second to last hour of the day has a 71% win rate. So if you zoom in here, you'll see that you've got 9:30, 10:30, 11:30, 12:30, 1:30, 2:30, 3:30. The first the first hour of the day only has a 14% win rate. So there's definitely some discrepancies here when you look at, since the start of the month or since the start of the year. It's been 5 months. So there has been a lot that's changed, but there is a lot of different ways that you can use the seasonality on the platform, regardless of what type of trader you are. So definitely wanted to point that out. And if you do want to check this out, you just go to the sidebar here. If you are a TrendSpider customer already, add or remove widgets, add new widget here, and you can add seasonality right here. So that's something that you can do. One thing I'll mention here on Tesla that is kind of interesting is the insider selling. You haven't seen many insiders buying over the last 5 or 6 months. You saw Antonio Gracias buy 5.7K. I'm not sure if that was actual buy or maybe it bought 10 shares. I don't know. Maybe he bought his child a couple shares. But for the most part, you can see he is dumping. Antonio Gracias, sold $127 million worth of Tesla back in early February. You can see here that Kimball Musk dumped quite a bit here. Yeah, on March 31st, Kimball Musk, $8.1 million worth of shares. So that's something to keep in mind, that insiders are definitely selling. They're not buying. And that is a way that you can pair your technical analysis with the less technical things like insider selling and that type of thing. Now, one thing that we just added to the platform is relative volume. So if you are wondering what is relative volume, you're essentially comparing the volume of a specific time frame to an average. So let's say going into tomorrow, you want to scan for maybe you want to scan for this week's volume that's already above 50% of the average. What you can do is you can go in, let's name this weekly relative volume scan. And the nice thing about the scanner on TrendSpider is you can actually use the current candle. So what does that mean? You can actually scan for the candle that's still forming. So obviously this candle that's still forming is the weekly candle. It's only Tuesday. We still have 3 days left in the week. So let's scan through the S&P 500. Click the current candle box here. Add parameter, condition. So we'd go to weekly, indicator, and you'd go to Rela, and all I have to do is rel, and relative volume will pop up here. And you can change this, right? So what I'm doing is I'm saying over the last 20 weeks, that is the average volume that I'm looking at. So 20 means the amount of weeks that I'm looking at. The SMA is just a simple moving average. So it's the simple moving average is just 20 divided by the closes. So that's just looking at the average volume. And then the value here is just really looking at the value is just the value of the indicator. So the base here is 1. So apply. You'll see here the weekly relative volume is greater than the constant value of, let's say, so it's Tuesday, right? It would be pretty strong if we had any weekly volume bars already bigger than 0.75% of the previous 20 weeks average. So that means that looking back 20 weeks, we have an average, right? So we can see that on the chart. Go to properties here, 20, show the MA. So this line here, that is your average volume. And if we go to the weekly here, you'll see that, just to kind of make this exact. And notice here that the volume has definitely been declining over the last several months. So what you can see here is that we're looking for volume that is 75% of the way up to this blue line. Now, not necessarily on Tesla, on any stock in the S&P 500. So if we go and scan this, you can see these are some names that are popping up. There's only 2 names right now that have about 0.75% of the average over the last 20 weeks. So HBI, obviously, this is definitely something that is on the downside on the volume. So notice here, right? You can see this blue line. You can see that our volume bar for the week is almost already at the average. So you can do this with any time frame. Maybe tomorrow morning, right? You want to see in the morning, you want to look for stocks and you want to scan stocks within the first 10 minutes of the open, and you want to see maybe stocks that already have 20% of their average volume. So you would go in, same thing. You go to, instead, you go to daily. So we're looking at the average 20-day volume is greater than 0.2. So that means we're already at 20% of the volume for the average in the first 10 minutes of the open. So you scan that. And in this case, you know, we're going to find stocks that have already closed on the day, but this is a scan that you can run into tomorrow morning. And you can find these stocks that are showing heavy volume within the first 10 or 20 minutes of the day. So relative volume is a new indicator. It's really nice to use because, as I mentioned, you can use the current candle. You can scan for this volume while the time frame is still forming. So as I mentioned, if you're looking at stocks in the S&P 500 into tomorrow and you want to look at 30 minutes into the open, you just go to the scanner, scan through either a watch list that you have, an index, whatever. You can see here that I have some custom watch lists that I've already created. I can go and scan through those if I want. In this case, I just have the S&P 500 up. Make sure that you click the current candle, and then you just go to daily, relative volume, and it depends, right? If you want to look at the average volume over the last 50 weeks, you're going to want to change this MA length to 50 because that means now we're looking back 50 weeks. If you wanted to keep it at 20, you can do that. It's up to whatever time frame you're looking at. And then you just look at the relative volume is greater than the constant value of whatever you're looking at. If you're looking for things that have over 50% of the average volume already in the first 30 minutes, just do 0.5 and you'll be able to scan those names. So it's a really powerful tool, especially if you are more of a day trader. It's a great way to see that strength and that momentum in some of these names, whether that's the upside or the downside. If you did want to only look for green days, you would just add another parameter here, add parameter, condition, daily, indicator, and you type in change, and you can see change percent here, and you can say is greater than 0. So that means that you're looking for relative volume with a higher, with about 50% of the average volume in let's say the first 30 minutes of the open, but you also only want to scan for daily percent changes that are greater than 0. So you're looking for only those moves that have a green move for the day. So if you haven't tried it already, definitely give it a shot. We have the free 7-day free trial. So, you can try this without having to commit to anything, but it is a very powerful indicator, especially if you're a day trader and you're looking for ideas going into the rest of the day. So that is the main things that I wanted to talk about. I will take some chart requests here. Looks like we had CLOV. Looks like we had AMC. So let's look at AMC, see what's going on here. Nice bounce. Daily. I guess after hours it's up. But you can see here, if we're looking at the anchored volume by price, same thing. Just anchor your volume by price from, in this case, I would anchor it from this swing low here. You'll see that, we're trying to get through this area here. There's a little supply that we need to get through, but if it can get through this area, this could be kind of a launch pad for price. So you could also anchor it from here. It's not going to change much. So if we anchor from the swing low, you'll see that still a majority of the shares, the volume is really focused right around this, let's say 920 to around 1025 area. So we'll have to see if this kind of launches going into the next couple days. The next one I think was CLOV, so Clover Health. Clover Health, not necessarily the strongest day considering other growth names out there, but a decent candle. This is where I would go in and check and see what the raindrop looks like. So remember, we were looking at SPY and we were seeing that even though it was a red day, we had a green raindrop. So on CLOV, let's split the screen here. Look at the raindrop chart. And notice here, green raindrop, even though we have a red candle. So definitely something to keep in mind going into tomorrow. Even though we do have this red close, we do have the green raindrop. You can see there's quite a bit of volume during the second half of the day near the top of the range. To me, showing that there's conviction by buyers. And notice here within this wick. So anytime you have, this wick here, and then you have volume within the wick, that is a pretty strong suggestion that there were some pretty aggressive buyers pushing the price up. Once those buyers were done buying, price was able to drop, not because sellers came in, but just because those aggressive buyers were done buying. So those are, that's CLOV and AMC. Let's see, can this TrendSpider work with cryptos? Yes. Yeah, we just did a ton of cryptos. So yeah, you can use TrendSpider for cryptos, Forex, equities, anything. And as I mentioned, BZ25 is the coupon code you can get for 25% off. Take a look at TOKO. What is TOKO? TOKO. Oh, this is a coin. Yeah, it looks, what is this against BTC? Is there a USD pair? Tether. Yeah, interesting. Kind of looks like the rest of the altcoins right now. But yeah, looking interesting. Now any other, let's see, oil. We can look at, let's see. We don't have oil futures, so we can look at USO. Oil's ripping, but I mean, the main thing that I would look at as a proxy for oil is just some of these names like MRO here. So if we go to the monthly chart, you'll see here that, I mean, we have broken out of this longer term kind of falling wedge. Definitely a longer term move to the upside. If you go to the daily chart, I mean, maybe you're forming a little bit of like a inverse head and shoulders here. So here's your right shoulder, here's your head, maybe your right shoulder here. So we'll have to see how that plays out, but definitely stalling a little bit. XOM, we can use that as a proxy as well. Yeah, not what I'd call the strongest day for oil. A lot of these things like oil, lumber are finally starting to pull back. NEO, we can look at NEO. Yeah, NEO's got a pretty decent candle today. The main thing I would point out here is the fact that we're still below this volume weighted average price pretty much from this February high here. So until we get above this area, this red shaded area, that would be around 41, 42. It's kind of stuck in limbo right now. So we'll just have to see what happens going into, the rest of the month. Now, if we look at the seasonality for NEO here, let's add seasonality. We can look back pretty much since this IPO'd. I was going to say a SPAC, but this is an IPO. May only has a 33% win rate. So definitely keep that in mind that, 50% win rate. But remember, if you're looking at seasonality since 2018, you don't really have a lot of months data points here. You only have 2.5 years or so, pretty much. So, or maybe a little more. So yeah, it's hard to look at seasonality here. If we look at the day of the week seasonality since the start of this year, you'll see here that, it's been a rough month. There hasn't been one day that has a higher than 50% win rate. So that clearly just shows how weak this year has been. We did have a strong start to the year, but definitely quickly faded to the downside, and now we're kind of stuck. just because we have a wick like we do today doesn't really mean much. You can see here that we also had this wick on March 5th, actually had another down day before reversing to the VWAP above. So, whenever you put in a wick like that, it's generally a pretty good, signal that we could be capitulating or in the process of capitulating. Let's see. ENPH. And we have about 2 or 3 more minutes here. So ENPH. Yeah, decent candle. I mean, talk about an absolute rip to the downside. Holy moly. Yeah, from late April 174 all the way down to the wick low of 107. So, I mean, this could be a little bit of a balanced candidate at this point. Let's look at this on a shorter term time frame and turn on the anchored volume by price here. See where the volume is holding. So if we anchor from the swing high here, you can see that there's quite a bit of volume holding down here. And then we have something called a volume gap. So you'll see here, there's not a lot of volume above. If you guys want an interesting case study on how that works, Apple is a good one. So if we go to the daily candle here, notice what happened on Apple today. And this is kind of like a great case study on using this volume by price. Same thing. You've got Apple. You've got this huge volume gap above, pretty much what we just talked about on ENPH. Notice how the price was able to move from April 5th all the way to April 14th from 123 all the way up to 134. That's a pretty big move up for Apple. The reason why I was able to move up so quickly is because you didn't have a lot of volume above. Now, kind of the theme of what we've been talking about today is whenever that price gets back up to this supply zone, these break-even people who literally bought Apple too early, they deal with a drawdown to the 115, 116 area, they get back to break even, they sell, and that's why the price was not able to get through this 134, 135 area. And that's also why the price was able to move so quickly back down through this area, because you also didn't have a lot of people breaking even to the downside until you got to around 123 today. So definitely something you want to add to your toolbox, the anchored volume by price. The thing that really makes it unique on TrendSpider is the ability to see this from the swing high. Seems like, yeah, TOKO, no. It seems like this TOKO is kind of getting pumped on this feed, so I'm not going to talk about that anymore. Yeah, so definitely don't love when, you guys, when someone's pumping the same coin. I'm sure the market cap's not very big, so no comment on that. But anyways, Apple, yeah, definitely a nice bounce, exactly where we expected it. And the whole reason I brought that up was ENPH. If we can move up through that area, if we go to the shorter term time frame, you'll see here that we do pretty much have that same gap above right in this area. So if we did start moving up quickly on ENPH, we could move pretty fast. Now, I think somebody mentioned ENPH maybe had earnings. So, I mean, I think let's see, without this, it's 121. Yeah, so it's about the same close. So either way, decent candle. Volume today, not anything too crazy. So if this was truly a bottom, I'd want to see kind of a little more volume here, but we'll just have to see what happens. That is all the time I have for today, everyone. Thank you for watching. Remember, all these charts that I went over are on TrendSpider, the charting platform for technical and fundamental analysis. And if you want to try it out, BZ25 is 25% off any plan, monthly or annual. And if you guys have any questions, you can always reach us on our Twitter feed at TrendSpider. Just send us a DM. So thank you, everybody, for your time. We'll see you next Tuesday. And I will hand it back over to you, Spencer.